Somewhere in the deep, dark corners of the internet, a figure was born. A figure so tall, so eerily thin, and so devoid of features that his very presence sends chills down the spine of anyone who dares to look. He has no face, no eyes, no mouth, yet his gaze is something you can feel, a cold, unyielding terror that creeps into your soul. This is the story of Slender Man, an internet legend that has transcended the digital world to haunt the nightmares of many. But who is Slender Man? A simple myth? A modern-day boogeyman? Or something far more sinister, lurking in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to strike? Tonight, we dive into the unsettling tale of Slender Man, the faceless stalker who preys on the innocent, drawing them into his twisted world where few have escaped, and even fewer have lived to tell the tale. This is not just a story, it's a warning. So sit back, turn off the lights, and listen closely, because once you've heard his story, you might just start seeing him in the shadows too. And if you do, it's already too late. It was the summer of 2010, and 4 friends, Sarah, Tom, Emily, and Jake, were itching for an adventure. They were all about 16, that age where you think you're invincible and ghost stories are just for little kids. Their small town didn't offer much excitement, so they decided to explore the woods that bordered the town, the kind of place that always seemed darker and creepier than anywhere else. Now, these woods weren't just any woods. They had a reputation, the kind that made parents warn their kids to stay away. There were whispers, stories about kids going in and never coming out. But Sarah, the bravest of the bunch, just shrugged off the warnings. "Come on, guys. It's just a bunch of nonsense. Are you really scared of a few trees?" With that, they set off, Sarah leading the way with a flashlight, and the others following, a mix of excitement and nervousness bubbling in their chests. The first stretch wasn't so bad, just your typical woods, with leaves crunching underfoot and the occasional rustle of a critter in the bushes. They joked and laughed, trying to shake off the uneasy feeling that started creeping up as the trees grew denser. But as they ventured deeper, the atmosphere changed. The woods got quieter. The usual sounds of birds or distant traffic faded, replaced by an eerie silence that hung heavy in the air. The shadows grew longer, and the trees seemed to close in on them, as if the forest itself was watching. "Do you guys hear that?" Emily asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Hear what?" Tom replied, but his voice wavered. They all stopped, straining their ears, but there was nothing, just the oppressive silence. Then, out of the corner of Jake's eye, he saw something. A figure, standing perfectly still between the trees, barely visible in the growing darkness. It was tall, impossibly tall, and dressed in what looked like a black suit. But what froze Jake's blood was the face, or rather, the lack of one. The figure had no face, just smooth, pale skin where eyes, a nose, and a mouth should have been. "Guys," Jake croaked, his throat suddenly dry, "we need to get out of here." The others turned to see what he was staring at, and that's when the panic set in. Without a word, they all turned and ran, not caring about the path or where they were headed, just desperate to get away from that thing. But no matter how fast they ran, the figure seemed to glide after them, silent and relentless, always just at the edge of their vision. They finally burst out of the woods, hearts pounding and lungs burning, into the relative safety of their neighborhood. They bent over, gasping for breath, looking around to make sure they had all made it. But they hadn't. Sarah was missing. "Where's Sarah?" Tom asked, panic rising in his voice. They shouted her name, ran back to the edge of the woods, but there was no sign of her. It was like she had vanished into thin air. The next few days were a blur. The police searched the woods, helicopters circled overhead, but Sarah was gone. The story spread through the town like wildfire, how 4 kids had gone into the woods, and only 3 had come back. The friends tried to explain what they'd seen, but who would believe them? A faceless man in the woods? It sounded like something out of a bad horror movie. The weeks turned into months, and the search was called off. The town moved on, but Jake, Tom, and Emily couldn't. They were haunted by nightmares, Visions of the faceless figure lurking just out of sight. They stopped talking about that night, stopped hanging out altogether. It was like the fear had driven a wedge between them. Years later, Jake was cleaning out his old room, preparing to leave for college, when he found something that sent a chill down his spine. It was Sarah's flashlight, the one she'd had with her that night. He could have sworn they'd left it in the woods, but here it was, tucked away in the back of his closet. And when he clicked it on, the beam still faintly glowed, as if it had just been used. But that wasn't the worst part. On the inside of the closet door, right where the flashlight had been, were scratch marks. Long, thin marks that looked like they'd been made by something sharp, and they were too high up for any normal person to reach. Jake felt a cold sweat break out on his forehead. He closed the closet door slowly, his hand shaking. He didn't tell anyone about what he'd found. He didn't even want to think about it. But deep down, he knew the truth. Slender Man had returned, and this time he wasn't just a story.